This is the Pathways to Greatness podcast, and I'm your host, Jeff Forrester. Well, I gotta hit mute or unmute myself. Anyways, welcome back to the Pathways to Greatness podcast. And today's guest is Duncan MacLeod. And like we talk about this in the episode about how amazing social media is. And as you start to pay attention to things that are of interest to you and that you find important, you will come across those and you will see more and you will meet really cool people like Duncan. Now, on the other side is if you are not being mindful of what you put into your brain and into the algorithm, that's what you will get. So be very careful, because I like to meet people like Duncan and have a positive interaction. And so Duncan founded Elite Athletic Development Group, which works on helping student athletes to grow and manage their life during and after the sport. And so we go into a lot of information, which is really cool. One is his definition of greatness is just making a difference. And we've talked about this on other episodes. If you can impact one life, and then that person impacts another life, and then that person impacts another life, that's how things change. That's how the world changes. We talk about confidence and self-esteem. We talk about student athlete development. The biggest is the belief cycle. He talks about that. There's just a lot of really cool strategies and tactics that he shares that I know everybody can benefit, whether you're an athlete, a parent of an athlete, or just a person that walks this planet. All of these things will work well in helping you have a better life. So, ladies and gentlemen, Duncan MacLeod. Well, Duncan, thank you so much for being very flexible. We've had several challenges from a technology perspective.
We have, and that's great, Jeff. It's great when it works.
It's life, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So all that being said, so this is Duncan MacLeod, everybody, and we came across each other through LinkedIn, and I can't remember. Did somebody introduce us, or did we just stumble upon one another?
I think we kind of stumbled upon one another. It seems as though when you start paying attention to certain content, just is because it's not that our phones or anything are listening to us, right? But it just seems to connect. Started following you and checking out your content. Love the podcast. Thank you very much, for inviting me on.
Yeah, no, this is great. So we'll get into who Duncan is. So Duncan, before we get into the fun part and the real reason that you're here, I'd like to play a game. You ready?
Okay, absolutely.
All right, so we're going to play Would You Rather.
Uh-oh, okay.
Okay, so would you rather freeze time or go back in time?
Freeze time.
Why so?
Because the past has made me who I am. And whether or not you subscribe to like messing with time, it's I think everybody maybe thinks every now and again, if I could only, go back and do this or do that different. But I'm a firm believer in everybody's where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there. Mm-hmm. And so I think that freezing time would be better.
Okay, awesome. All right, would you rather live without music or TV?
So can I get music on TV?
Well, hey, this is your game, man.
Off the bat, get rid of TV and keep music. But there are some things worthwhile, I think, on TV. And if I could still get my music through TV, then I would get rid of the music and keep TV. But if I couldn't get music on TV, I'd get rid of TV, if that makes sense.
Okay, sure. What kind of music do you like?
Growing up, it was rock and roll, which is now classic rock. But I've become a country fan over the last few years. My daughter kind of introduced it to me and pushed it on me, and I started listening to it, and I was like, all right, this is different. And I'm not going to say like I necessarily identified with the country life and all that, but because again, growing up outside Boston, we didn't have country music growing up, But yeah, so I've been getting into country music the last couple of years.
Okay, awesome. All right, so would you rather have pizza or tacos?
Pizza.
What kind?
Uh, um, so it's kind of a mood thing. I mean, a good pepperoni pizza is always good. I do like a barbecue chicken type thing with some red onions and pepper jack cheese on it, maybe. And yes, I do enjoy pineapple pizza, pineapple and ham pizza. So
I'm
you
the
might get
same way. People
okay.
just get so violent when you talk about
They
pineapple on pizza.
do, they do, and it's simply just fruit. Um, but it's not the worst thing to put on pizza for by any means. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
definitely pizza.
Okay.
My
Got
comfort
it.
food.
Yes, I'm with you on that one. And you really can't go wrong with either one,
No.
but you'll either have people like you that just answer quickly and they know one way or the other, and then
Yeah.
some are like, but I could have a taco pizza. So kind of like back to your TV question.
Yeah, I mean, you could, but to me, I'm kind of I mean, a purist maybe when it comes to tacos, right? Like
Yeah.
either meat tacos or fish tacos. Don't put pizza in a taco. No, no, just have pizza.
Yeah, there you go. All right, and then the last one is if you came with a warning label, what would it say?
Ouch. I mean, that's a great question, Jeff. I think that um, loaded with sarcasm.
Okay.
It's actually so growing up in the north. Where are you from? And I forgot because I know you live down in Orlando.
I'm a
Um,
Floridian, so
oh,
fifth
you are
generation
okay.
Floridian. Yep.
A Florida man. Okay, cool. So I love the state of Florida, but growing up outside Boston, sarcasm is a second language, and when I joined the service, I quickly realized that there are some people in life who just don't understand sarcasm, um, and so I've gotten pretty good at managing it and being mindful of who my audience is and that sort of thing. But every now and again, it comes out and it can be kind of biting. But again, I try to be mindful of it because of it's just not everybody gets it.
Yeah, that is true. Well, and now everybody's so incredibly sensitive that they can't even take a joke.
You're absolutely right, and it's so funny because some they'll get offended over a joke about one demographic, but not another.
Hmm.
And it's usually the people getting offended by a joke aren't the demographic the joke is about. You know,
Right.
and it's yeah, it can be an interesting thing to experience and to see because again, going back to the sarcasm thing, sometimes people just don't understand sarcasm.
Yep.
So I'm
Exactly.
trying
Well,
to be mindful about it.
yeah, it's important. It's important.
Yeah,
So, Duncan, thank you. Everybody, this is Duncan MacLeod. And so I think where we got connected is we're on pretty much the same mission, and that's
yeah,
empowering student athletes to grow and manage their life during
yeah,
and after sport. That's the key.
yeah.
You're the founder of Elite Athletic Development Group. Great name, by
That's
the
it.
way. And I like the
Thank you.
logo. That's
I
really
appreciate
awesome.
it.
And so, with that, we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
And the hope is that we're going to cross networks and bring new people to the show. And then
Mhm.
just to explain, the pathways to greatness and where that came
Yeah.
from is I decided to start the podcast in 2023.
Mhm.
And from that was I just wanted to show how everybody has a different definition of greatness, and
Mhm.
everybody has a pathway that is way different than each
Yeah.
other, and it's not linear. It's not going to
No.
go A to B in a straight line. And so I want to bring people on like yourself to share the strategies and tactics that you have that you've used to manage yourself as
Okay.
well as other people that you work with in striving for greatness. I don't think we
Yeah.
ever reach greatness.
Right.
But some people, based on their definition, they may. Who knows?
Mhm.
So, with all that being said, Duncan, what is your definition of greatness?
So for me, my definition of greatness it actually changes depending on not the time of the day or the mood that I'm in, but I think it changes a little bit depending on my focus. And so when I was in the midst of my naval career, doing certain things in the Navy were okay. I'm going to be successful in that career, right? And I'm going to be great at that, and I'm going to be great at this. And now as I come to the twilight of my Navy career, my I'll know that I make greatness when I can walk away and look myself in the mirror every day and say, you know what, like I made a difference, whether it's one person, whether it's 10 people, you know, I think that I'm not going to be able to change the world of 7 billion people. I can't change the world in that regard. But if I can change the life of one person, well, then really I've changed the world, you know, and if I can help somebody do that in a way that serves them, then to me that I'm doing great things if I can do that. But I don't know that I'll ever reach greatness because I am a work in progress.
Aren't we all? And it's a great definition, and I hope people hear that, is that it's just striving to make an impact on the person that you're standing in front of. I was raised in a small business family. My dad owned a toy store and a hobby store, and
Nice.
he reinforced constantly the most important person, especially in retail, is the
Hmm.
person standing in front of you.
Right.
That's what's critical. That's what's important. And we forget it. I forget it a
Yeah.
lot. And it's difficult. So when you're working with student athletes or you're just talking to friends, how do you help them identify that? How do I help people that I'm standing in front of?
You know, it's interesting because a long time friend of ours, their son, just recently got married, and he's the same age as my youngest son, and there's three of them that went to kindergarten together, and they kind of grew up together, and so they've known each other a really long time, and they were they were over the house. We had something going on, and then actually it was a graduation party for my youngest son. And they were over the house and we were talking because he had just graduated. This young gentleman had just graduated from college as well. It's like, hey, what are you doing? You know, I know he got 2 degrees, and so not that I set out to make an impact necessarily in that moment, but asking questions and listening. The There's a book, and actually I think I have it. It's over my shoulder. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not about the answers to our questions, but it's about the questions that we either ask or that we are asked. I think that can drive a person to self-reflect. It can drive them to a decision, to a course of action. And so talking with this young gentleman, you know, it's kind of like, well, what do you want to do? He's like, well, I want to do this. I'm kind of like, oh, okay. Well, what's stopping you? And he kind of stopped and looked at me. He's like, really nothing. Okay. If you want to continue any further, let me know. Happy to chat with you. Right. But just calling them or asking them a question that in a way that somebody hadn't asked them the question before. And to me, over the last number of years, I will admit I've struggled with active listening or not actively listening as well as I should or could. And so I've done a lot of work in being intentional in listening to learn versus listening to respond, and listening to hear sometimes not even the words that are being said, but the words just as much that aren't being said, and then being able to ask a question or formulate a response that is serving that person versus coming from a place more of we than me, because I've also, um, you know, being a Master Chief in the Navy, it's uh, only 1% of the Navy ever makes Master Chief, right? So, and then even a smaller percentage make Command Master Chief. And so, and I'm a Command Master Chief in the Navy. And I make that point because it would be easy to let ego get in the way sometimes, you know. But I try really hard to, I am who I am. You know, it's what is it, Popeye, right? I am who I am. I'm a sailor man. And there was another saying I really liked. It's too like I am who I am. Labels are for soup cans, so don't put one on me. You know. But going back to how do I serve somebody? Really, it's kind of how they need to be served in that moment. Most of the time it works. Sometimes it necessarily doesn't. I don't necessarily do them a disservice, mind you, right? But it's I always try to just not. I just want to leave people feeling good about themselves if I can help it.
Sure. And I hope everybody heard and paid attention to what you said and was practicing what you just talked about in active listening. It's not difficult to make a massive impact on someone. It's keep your mouth shut and
Yeah,
listen,
yeah,
ask questions and listen and let them talk. And you may have read this book as well, is What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Yeah. Yep.
Great book. And it just
Yeah.
talks about how inherently, I feel like, and even the book talked about, that we try to make a connection with people by
Hmm.
one-upping them, but we don't
Right.
realize we're one-upping them. It's they
Right.
tell a story and then we say, well, let me tell you about my story, Duncan,
Right.
versus, man, that's amazing. So
Yeah.
what else happened on that trip? Instead
That's
of
right.
trying to take over the conversation.
Hmm. Oftentimes, there's a conversation I have sometimes with people, and it's the expectations versus agreement, and where expectations are when we put our context on a situation or a conversation or circumstances, and in the if we're talking about youth sports, coaches come from a place of authority and teaching skills and tactics in the game and things like that, and like these are my expectations of you. And then oftentimes what I've found is coaches are kind of disappointed in the outcome because maybe the team didn't do what they expected or the game didn't go as expected, whatever it is. And we even think back to a time in our life when we put expectations on a situation, and more times than not, we're disappointed because expectations are one way, whereas an agreement is it's a two-way conversation. And for coaches and student athletes, I try to tell a coach, because again, a lot of coaches have 10, 15, 20, 30 years on a young athlete, especially if it's a father coaching their son or whatnot, maybe, or a coach has been at high school for 30 years, hey, have your non-negotiables that you can hold the student athletes accountable, the showing up on time with your gear, with your head on right, the non-negotiables you can hold them accountable to, but then make an agreement, hey, I'm going to do my part, A, B, and C, and I need you to do your part, A, B, and C. Can we agree to do that? Because part of it is too is, and I hate to say this generation, right? But that's a fact of the matter. Empowering them and enabling them to have a decision in how things are done, you get a better result. And that's not even this generation. It's my generation, any generation. If you empower a person or you give them the ability to make a decision, have buy-in, and have say into what they do, you're going to get a better product regardless. So that expectation versus agreement, I think sometimes is really important. And the expectation it comes from a place of me or I or ego, and agreement comes from others and self-service, right? Hey, how can we get through this? Versus because, did you ever watch Ted Lasso?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. There's a video or there's a clip about Jamie Tart doesn't want to practice, and Ted Lasso kind of goes off. And we're talking about practice, and I liked it because he's like, that's the only time that it's us against them. It's the only time that we can control. It's us 11 on that field or on the pitch versus those 11, or pick a sport. And I think that was a pretty poignant moment in the series because it was a good scene. I really liked it. But again, the agreement versus the expectation, I think, is important.
Yes. And as parents, we fail at that a
Yeah.
lot.
Hmm.
And it's like you said earlier, it's that position of authority. And it's interesting that we put ourselves in that parent-child relationship and we immediately throw everything that we know and how we would deal with somebody outside these four walls away.
Yeah.
And I'll be curious if you've had a chance to actually use the, and I want to get into elite athletic development,
Hmm.
if you've had a chance to coach your children with the material, because I've been able to coach both of mine
Right.
with great success,
Hmm.
but when I become a dad, I
Right.
end up not having the same success, not
Yeah.
getting good answers
Yeah.
because I'm telling versus asking. What's been
Right.
your experience with that?
So I did coach my kids when they were younger, and they're both, so my three kids are 22, 24, and just about 27. So it's been a couple years, but I had coached my son in baseball, and I coached my other son in volleyball, and there was a certain point when they hit 12, 13 years old, I was like, I can't coach you anymore because I don't. It can be hard doing the coach dad thing, and I knew that they were less likely to listen to me because I was dad and versus coach. And even, so that was 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I was also very different in the way I lead and the way I communicate. it was more coming from a place of, again, having been in the military at that point for 20 years, or 18 years or whatever the case is. It was That's how I was leading. Not necessarily leading at home, but again, it was the accountability piece, right? Just that discipline and things like that. And so at the time, it was very much, we did talk about like process versus outcome. Not quite in those terms necessarily, but I was always trying to praise the effort versus the outcome, because even concentrating on the outcome, usually whatever you concentrate on, good or bad, is likely what you're going to get. So the content that I have now, I haven't had the opportunity to coach my sons with, but I do talk with them about it because they also both played NCAA. And my son played Division III NCAA, and my other son played Division I club ball, volleyball. And so I'm talking to the concepts, and I'm saying, hey, as a student athlete, does this make sense to you? Right. So they are my sounding board a little bit, and my son's actually helping me out a little bit with Elite Athletic Development Group, in terms of content and doing some of the back end stuff, website and things of that nature. And it's helped me, I think, in my relationship with them as adults, because as your kids grow older and you grow older and they become adults, you have to really reevaluate what your relationship with them looks like, because you can't come from a place, do it because I tell you to, because I'm the dad, because, well, that doesn't work, right? Because they're adults, they're growing, they're off at college or they're off living somewhere, and you can tell them all day long, hey, that's not a good idea, I wouldn't do that. But if they're going to do it, they're going to do it. All you can do is kind of hope that, hey, you kind of taught them well enough when they were younger, say a prayer or two, right, for God to hold them safe, and wait for them to come home or to give you a call. But the concepts, I don't think that the concepts that we talk about in at EADG are not just for youth sports, but I think that's where, I don't want to say the most damage is being done. There's a lot of unintended second and third order effects happening within youth sports today. And that's one of the things that I want to get after with EADG.
So let's dig in a little bit further. So I have my son's 16. He's going to be a junior in high school, and he plays football. And my daughter's 13. She'll be 14 in September. She plays club volleyball.
Okay.
So you can relate to that. Yeah. And it is an ever-changing world. It's becoming really competitive. And as you go into college, and that's becoming a mess. And it's just, you just see everything changing on a regular basis. So introduce the audience to what EADG is, why you decided to create it, and then we'll dig into more of what you do and shed some light to help parents and other adults know what they should be doing.
Absolutely. So a little bit of, I guess, context, a little bit of history about where I ended up, or how I get into the student athlete realm. And so one of the things that I've been doing for the last couple of years is I've been a coach, a professional coach for the Navy. I'm on active duty orders right now. And so I've been doing coaching sailors and Department of Defense civilians and federal civilians over the last couple of years. And one of my civilian clients, she's a former Division I athlete. And so one of the things that we had talked about, or that she had talked about wanting to work on, was confidence and self-esteem. And it just kind of baffled me a little bit, right? Division I athlete, went to high school for her sport, Division I, all 4 years, athletic scholarship, so which is a little bit different too than just playing, right? How do you not have confidence and self-esteem? And what happened is we delved into it a little bit. And in coaching, I don't usually go back too far into the future, because coaching is more forward-looking than looking to the past. But we delved into it a little bit just to kind of maybe find out why, or maybe where it was coming from, so that she could move forward. Not therapy or anything, but again, it piqued my interest. And I just had simply asked the question, where did she think that was coming from? And eventually she came to the conclusion that when she was a teenager, very well-intentioned and well-meaning, her parents and coaches telling her to suck it up, let it go, push through it, which is cool, and we get that. but nobody was teaching her how to do it. Nobody was teaching her what it meant, what it looked like. Nobody was teaching her how to deal with the feelings from it and that sort of thing. And so she bottled it up. And in her words, when it came out, it was spectacular and not in a good way. And so that started me thinking about student athletes and then my experiences with my sons. And they had some experiences in their sports that were not super positive, that were as a result of kind of parents and coaches. And so I kind of dove into it a little bit. And then I took a course by Brian Kane, the Mental Performance Mastery course, and which is a phenomenal course. And I was like, okay, this is really cool. I want to get into this. Started working with a couple of friends, family friends, kids who are athletes. Hey, is this something you would need, and that sort of thing, right? And then last year, I did a couple of keynotes with some schools. And when I started talking out and reaching out to Division I or Division III colleges and high schools and things like that, there were other gaps besides just like mental strength or mental performance. There were a lot of other gaps. And then I started getting into what the NCAA says schools are supposed to have, or NAIA. And like NCAA says, thou shalt have a student athlete development program, and it has to have these 5 pillars, and which is great. But your Division I school is going to have far more resources than a Division III school, and so it's going to look different. And I am not knocking the NCAA by any means, because they have a whole ton of things going on, but there's a gap there between what's being required, what they're saying schools need to have, and the resources to provide it. Throw NIL on top of that, the name, image, and likeness world, which has really only been around for about the last 3 years, and that's, I don't want to call it the Wild Wild West, but it's ever changing. The athletes are getting paid a lot of money. Schools can now give payments direct to schools. Schools can give payments directly to students. There's still legislation going on, or court cases going on, potential legislation from Congress at the state level. And so with NIL, I'm not ever going to get into NIL. But what I did is I sat down and I've run past a few people. So schools, they do the academics and the athletics piece pretty well. They have coaches, and they do the skills coaching and training, and the weight and conditioning, strength and conditioning and things like that, which is great in the academics. And but that's just like this much to being a good person and a good student athlete, right? And again, to your point, what happens later on? So a student in high school is not necessarily going to go play in college. The probabilities are pretty low. And after college, the probability shrinks even more for somebody to go play professional sports. So one of the things I encourage when I talk with coaches and parents is to encourage an identity outside of the sport. And I have 5 domains of student athlete development that I've kind of put into a framework, and it's mental strength, emotional intelligence, leadership, service, and resilience. And those 5 domains, I have content for each one of those domains, and it can be applied. Really, the conversation is going to be the same whether it's a high school athlete, college athlete, coach, parent. It's just going to be a different context, because the principles apply. If emotional intelligence, getting into self-awareness and self-regulation are probably like the 2 more important pieces, because you can't get into social awareness if you can't self-regulate, and you can't self-regulate if you're not self-aware. One of the keynotes that I have, I call it the power to choose, and it talks about mindset and process over outcome and decision making and what that looks like, and a mental reset process. And some of that I pulled actually from Brian's material, right? I've tweaked it and massaged it and moved around a little bit, but his started me on the path. And I read Carol Dweck's book on mindset, and she gave me a whole bunch more information. And then there's another book too that I'm actually just started, right? You might like, Coaching the Mental Game,
Okay.
by H.A. Dorfman. It's an older book, but it's really good. It's got some really good stuff. So with Elite Athletic Development Group, I will be filling gaps that schools have in terms of their student athlete development process or programming. And one of the interesting things as well, because student athlete development is actually an emerging industry, kind of alongside NIL, because the NCAA in 2022, they released a white paper. It was actually the Student Athlete Development Task Force, and they had released a white paper that said, hey, you know, it's been kind of an informal process, kind of an ad hoc process over the last couple of years, and so, or not a couple of years, but over the last 20 years. And so what they're trying to do is formalize benchmarks for desired outcomes for students. Hey, by the time our student athletes graduate, this is kind of where we want to see them. These are the goals. And then it outlines competencies for student athlete development professionals, right? Hey, if you're going to be in this realm, these are the things you need to know about. And this is, for a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So 3 different levels, right, of what they're looking for. And everything that I've done aligns with what is in that white paper. That was just kind of happenstance how that worked out. And even though I know not every school is NCAA, but it is the largest organization in the country. And so aligning with what they're doing is it'll cover down on what other schools and what other organizations are looking to do as well, right? And it's not going to be long before NIL and student athlete development really creeps down to the high school level, because student athletes in high school face very different challenges. And one of the things that I'm able to do, I find myself in a pretty unique position, is student athlete demographic, call it 16 to 23-year-olds for the most part. A large chunk of that age demographic, 18 to 23, are the same age as junior sailors that I've had the honor of leading in the Navy. And I've had the honor of teaching and facilitating and training them in leadership and resilience and mental toughness. And junior sailors and student athletes, they have the same challenges. Very different contexts for sure, but they have the same challenges that they face. Resilience, confidence, right? Emotional intelligence, purpose. Where do I fit into this thing, into this large organization? I was at, you had mentioned the book, what got you here isn't going to get you there. Or, yeah, what got you here isn't going to get you there. Same thing in sports. If you have a high school senior who's a Division I 5-star recruit, and he goes to a Division I school to pick a sport, every other kid in the team was a Division I 5-star recruit from his hometown or her hometown, right? So that can be very hard for a young person to deal with, because just because you get recruited and you go there your freshman year doesn't mean you're going to play. It doesn't mean you're going to stay at that school. It doesn't mean that you're going to get money every year. There's a host of different things that come into play in terms of what's available to them. Now you throw the transfer portal in there, and if a student, and I have to find the research, but I read it online, and it was like when a student athlete transfers once, their percentage of graduation or likelihood of graduation goes down to like 70%. And then if they transfer twice, that drops down to like 40%. And if they transfer 3 times, it goes down to like 10%, because every time they transfer, they lose credits. So if they go to school for 4 years and they go to a school for a 5th year of eligibility, they might not even be anywhere close to a degree. Well, now what, right? So all that, Elite Athletic Development Group, I'm starting to work with a local high school here in Virginia Beach, and I'm having conversations with a couple of different schools, and because it's necessary. It is. And, I'm part of, here in Virginia, we have the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame. And then here locally, we have the Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters, CHKD. And those 2 organizations got together and they developed the Youth Sports Mental Health and Wellbeing Alliance. And it is a phenomenal initiative that it's designed to basically just keep the conversation going about youth sports and mental well-being and what that looks like. And Will Driscoll, who's the director of the Virginia Sports Hall of Fame, phenomenal job, phenomenal spokesperson and face of the Alliance. And I'm lucky to be able to be involved with that and just help keep that conversation going. I think I can get to the point down the road where the content that I have is going to be able to help at some point, in the alliances and endeavors, and it's not my goal. My vision is not to just be a one-man show or a 2-person show. I want to grow Elite Athletic Development Group into an organization that is able to serve high schools and colleges across the nation.
Yeah, Duncan, thank you very much for sharing that vision, the giving people the reason behind it. And I can't imagine anybody that would challenge anything that you had shared, because it's something that all of our young people are facing. And there
Yeah,
was another interesting statistic that over 30% of the Division I athletes have shared that they have challenges with their mental health, and it
yeah,
surrounds mental exhaustion and time management.
yeah,
That just means they're overwhelmed with all of this new
yeah,
responsibility that they've
yeah,
never had before. So all that being said, and you shared a lot of information, I want to provide the audience some value. So
yeah.
of the things that you've seen, what are some things that people can use to help their own kids, or
hmm
if they're a coach, help their players, or if they
yeah.
just know someone who has an athlete as a child that they could help and influence?
So I think that, and thank you for that question. I appreciate it because there's so much, right? We could talk for hours on end about what's going to work for who, but one of the biggest things that I've seen is belief, is or what's called the belief cycle, right? Where it, and again, going back to Ted Lasso, right? They hit the nail on the head with that one, where you have to have some sort of belief, whether it's you can believe that you can do the sport or whatever the case is. But the biggest thing is to believe in yourself. And then because if you can believe in yourself, that's going to drive you to behave authentically. And then that's going to allow you to become authentic, right? So there's that kind of belief, behave, become cycle. But the mindset piece and Carol Dweck's work is absolutely phenomenal. And her book is simply titled Mindset. And she identifies fixed and growth mindsets, what those look like, and the positive and negatives. There's really not a lot of positive to a fixed mindset, to be honest. But it is a matter of if I was to, and I talked with actually a 12U baseball team and a couple of the concepts that resonated with them and their parents, and that have also resonated with older athletes. Again, a growth versus fixed mindset. Don't let failure define you. It's the effort that you put into it because, and you can look at whatever successful or elite athlete you want in any sport, and they've all failed at some point in time. But if they let that failure define them, or if they let that failure drive their decision whether or not to continue in the sport, they never would have been successful. And I know there's a popular thing going on about like how many shots Michael Jordan has taken versus how many he's missed and things like that. And Kobe Bryant, had a lot of good things to say about. I don't love to win. I don't hate to lose. I play the game to learn. Is kind of paraphrasing him. So that the encouraging a growth mindset and being able to learn from mistakes and failures, and not along with that, not focusing on the mistakes because I would submit, Jeff, when you make a mistake, do you know that when you make the mistake?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we all do, right?
Yeah,
We all do.
exactly.
But what we often do is we self-flagellate, right, and beat ourselves up, and we start talking negative and things like that. So, with the growth mindset, what it can help with is changing the way that positive self-talk, and not like standing in front of a mirror, the positive affirmations. There's a place for that, but understanding that voice that's in our head chirping that wants us to concentrate on the mistake so that we don't repeat it, like that is our ego trying to keep us safe from failure. But switching it around and saying, hey, I don't want to be safe, I want to learn from my failure, and asking, and I don't remember, but I think Brian, it was in Brian's material too, was well, butter how. I think that was one of his exercises.
Hmm.
I've seen it in a couple of different places, which that focuses on, okay, cool, I made a mistake, but what did I do well? Right? If I struck out at the plate, it wasn't all bad, right? I was able to get in the batter's box. If I was able to participate at all in the sport, there's some good came out of it. And concentrating, what did I do well? What can I do better? And how can we do that? And tying that in with a growth mindset of I'm going to learn from this, because that's going to set the foundation as an athlete grows, or help flip the switch for an athlete. Because again, going with this book, who's the author? Mary Lee Adams. I don't know. Have you ever read this book? Seen this book?
I have. Well,
Change your
I've heard
questions.
of it, but I haven't seen it or read it. I have another one called
Highly, highly
a more
recommend it.
beautiful question. If you're looking for another one, that one's a really good one.
Okay. Similar thing, right? Because it's about that we like the questions that we talk about or we ask ourselves. Because I treat myself far worse than I would ever treat another person, and I think that goes for most people. And then concentrating. This ties in with the fixed growth mindset is focusing on the process versus the outcome. I had a young athlete ask me, "Hey, when we're down 5-3, and it's the eighth inning, why don't we win? Why can't we come back?" I said, and I asked, well, "What crosses your mind in the eighth inning when you're down 5-3?" I was like, do you tell yourself we're going to lose, or do you tell yourself how can we win?" And he was like, "Well, it depends. Some guys say we're going to lose. Some guys say we're going to win." Well, you got to all be pulling in the same direction because that we're going to lose. That's likely what's going to happen. That negative energy is going to impact the rest of the team, And so understanding the process, right? One pitch, one at bat, one inning, one period, whatever it is, like one shift on the ice, right? Take it, enjoy the process, because when we concentrate on the outcome too, we lose the joy of the sport,
Hmm.
right? Because we concentrate, and it's not even just the sport; it's regardless of what we're doing, right? Do you fish at all by chance?
I do. Hmm.
Okay, I'm not a huge fishing guy, but I'll go. And honestly, I don't. It's not about catching the fish for me, right? It's about sitting there with a buddy of mine and just casting into the water, and we're hanging out and shooting the bull, maybe having a beer or three, right? It's the process of it. It's not the outcome. If I catch a fish, great. If I don't, that's okay because I just got to spend 2 hours with a buddy of mine, you know. And that process over outcome resonates with junior athletes or student athletes, I should say, and sometimes when you're able to have a conversation with a coach or a parent and remind them of that, they also might have a light bulb moment, right? Which is good because parents and coaches can negatively impact the student athlete. And then the so the mindset, the process over outcome, and then because those are concepts that can be really talked about at any level, and it can be spoken about in a way that you can kind of make it relate to any age, right? It's not super advanced or anything like that, and it's not really, you're not delving into psychology. It's what works. Decision making, I think one of the things that's important for parents and coaches to do with young athletes is to help them understand what decision making is, but also how to do it, like on a repeatable and sustainable process or methodology or whatever you want to say, because they have to understand. Again, this is kind of going to the emotional intelligence piece and self awareness. You can be self aware, like for instance, for me, I know I'm very sarcastic. So I'm self aware that I'm very sarcastic, but if I don't use that knowledge to manage myself in various interactions, what good does it do, right? So you can, having a student athlete and speaking to a student athlete, letting them know that it's okay to feel what they're feeling in the moment, but it's not necessarily the best idea to hold on to it or whatever the case might be, right? But teaching them decision-making process that is repeatable and sustainable. And that means a process that's not necessarily exclusively dependent on feelings, right? Because feelings change, emotions change, facts of the matter don't change, right? The scoreboard doesn't care about your feelings, you know, in any sport. And so being able to teach a young athlete um, a decision-making process that is in alignment with their values, right? It goes to a friend of mine uh, talked to me about integrity once, and oftentimes when you ask people, what's integrity, and they'll say, um, doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And what I would submit, and I got this from a friend of mine, was that's not integrity, that's discipline, right? Doing what you're supposed to do when nobody's looking. Integrity is more living as a whole, as a whole integer, right? So, and the integrity of like living authentically, being who you are regardless of the circumstances. And I have another friend who's a Navy chaplain, And so the Navy chaplains, they take care of the Navy and the Marine Corps. And he was telling me this story, that he had, when a chaplain walks into a room, everybody like stops acting like a fool, right? The conversation stops because chaps just walked in, you know? And so when chaplain walked in, they were telling a story, whatever, and somebody was cussing and stopped right in the midst of the conversation and the words when the chaplain walked in. And they were like, oh, sorry about that, chaps. I didn't mean to cuss in front of you and whatever. And he was like, that's okay. I don't mind you not being a person of integrity, right? And it stopped the Marine cold. And because, like, chaps, like, what are you talking about? He's like, don't change who you are, how you communicate, just for me. He's like, I walked into the room. He's like, I get it. It's, you're 21 years old and you're with your buddies or whatever. Don't change who you are, how you act, if that's who you are, right? And I think that we lose that sometimes in society because we're so afraid of being judged, or people passing judgment on us for any number of different things, whether it's a joke potentially that offends somebody, or if it's making a wrong decision. And today, I mean, you see it online, the divisiveness, judging people for being who they are. Who are we to judge, Jeff? That's not our
Mm-hmm.
job, right? But we do, and it's oftentimes the people who say that they're not judgmental. Those are usually the people that are the most judgmental.
Oh yeah, for
Right?
sure. Yep. Well, real quick
So
before we
yeah,
keep going, this is you've
yeah,
given me so much. I want to go back because I'm sure
okay,
people are hanging on the part about decision making, because this
yeah,
not only will help student athletes, because that's critical. That's just all young people. Is we pray, like you said earlier with our
mm-hmm.
kids, we just pray that we know they're going to make bad decisions. We just want to
Yeah,
make sure that they're not decisions that they can't recover from,
right,
or that are going to
right,
be really painful to recover from.
sure,
So help people understand, even because it'll help me, it'll help them,
yeah,
whether they're young or not, to go through your process of decision making. What does that look like?
okay. So there's a book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, I think it is, and he wrote it while he was in a concentration camp in World War II. And one of the things that he says, and I'm completely paraphrasing, is basically there's a stimulus and there's a response. And so something happens in response, and we have to learn how to operate in that gap between stimulus and response. And I've known that for years, and sometimes I've been successful at it, and sometimes I'm not, right? But I ran across it in a different context when I took Brian's course, and E plus R equals O, the event plus response equals the outcome. And it aligns perfectly. So I talk about both that gap between stimulus and response, but operating at learning or knowing, or learning how to operate at that plus sign, right? Because we can't control what happens to us. We can't control the outcome. We can influence it, but we can't control it. And then we can only control what we respond, right? Control what we can control. It's a big Stoic principle. But okay, cool. Well, how do I learn how to operate in that gap between stimulus and response? And how do I learn to operate at that plus sign? And so there's a decision-making framework that was developed in the 1950s by a guy named Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd in the Air Force. And it's called the OODA loop, OODA, and observe, orient, decide, and act. And so he had developed it basically for fighter pilots, and for them to be able to use in combat. And his theory was that a fighter pilot that was able to make a decision quicker and better and disrupt his opponent's OODA loop was going to be victorious. And so I like it because if it can be used in the midst of a dogfight in the sky.
We're
Yeah,
good.
okay. I think that if it's good enough to be used in aerial combat, we can use it on a day-to-day basis or in the midst of a sports game. And so the observe is your event or the stimulus, right? You observe whatever happens to you in life. And then that's the first O. The second O is to orient, and then you have D. So you orient yourself to the facts of the situation and you make a decision. If you're, and I'll use baseball as an example. If you're a second baseman and there's two outs, no men on base, and there's a batter that's up, the event is going to be whatever the batter does, whether it's strike out or hit the ball. If they hit the ball, then I'm in my mind, I'm orientating myself to what could happen if the ball goes to my left, to the right, or to me. And then based off of that, I'm going to make a decision, and then I'm going to act. So, and the act is my response. So that orient and decide is where you learn to operate at the plus sign. And so, and then the outcome is going to be what the outcome is. And I often tell people, like, you have the answers to the test before you even need them. Because it's about preparation. If you utilize the OODA loop, stimulus gap, or E plus R equals O, and plus OODA loop on a consistent basis, because when you put a name to something and you can practice and be intentional about it, then you get better at it and you get quicker at it. And when the time comes, okay, I've been in a similar situation to this, and this is what I did then, and I was successful with it, so I can do it again, and boom, right? And whether it's, a young man going to meet the father of a girl on a first date, right? Or if it's a young student athlete that's faced with peer pressure at school to drink or to do drugs, or if they're in the midst of a game, right? The framework of OODA loop and E plus R equals O, or stimulation gap, can be applied to any situation, because it all starts up here. It all starts with mindset and process over outcome, this process of decision making. And then there are times too that the decision making, a lot of times is based on our value system. And so I think that's another part that I have some content on value systems and developing your values or figuring what those out. That is from an moral and ethical decision-making standpoint, right? Values, Brene Brown has a very cool little 2-page exercise that you could do, and I've got a couple other exercises. But the decision-making process, ethically and morally, because again, if you have a student athlete and they have that peer pressure to do something they're not supposed to do because they have a curfew, because they're mid-season, or potentially trying a banned drug or banned substance or whatever. And I kind of pulled it from what the Navy does for its at the Naval Academy and NROTC. What are the constraints that they face? What are the potential consequences? What are their special obligations based on what their role is, right? Are they the captain on the team even? Because being the captain of a team, you're going to have a little bit different, some different constraints and consequences than somebody who's not the captain of a team, right? Mm-hmm. And then character. At the end of it all, it's character. Talent's going to get you to the top, but character is what's going to keep you there, right? And so it's the decision-making process. It's not the only one, but I've found that it resonates with people, and it's usable, right? Because it's digestible, and that's the thing. It's actionable. It's not just simply theory. You can take E plus R equals O, and that plus sign. You observe, you orient yourself to the facts, and you make a decision on how to act. And the outcome is going to be what the outcome is going to be, right? We can't control that as much as we'd like to. We can't control it. But I think that utilizing that framework, that OODA loop framework, and that I always joke too, like, who here likes math, right? And nobody ever puts their hand up except for like 2 people. But learning to operate at the plus sign, I think, is important.
Yeah, for sure. Duncan, man, this is good stuff. And I hope people really were able to soak in and listen to the decision-making process, because it is valuable, and we have to be able to help our young people and even our friends. And that's where mentorship comes into play, and just having a community and making people feel safe to ask the quote unquote dumb question, because they feel like if they ask you, hey, what do I do if somebody offers me this, or what do I do that? And if you make them feel like an idiot, they're not going to ask you questions when it really, really matters. So be open, receive questions, allow people to feel safe to ask those questions. And then there's sometimes they don't even know what questions to ask in a mentorship role. And I know a lot of times coaches, we move back and forth from the coaching role, but then sometimes with young people, they don't even know how to answer. So then you have to shift a little bit into that mentorship role to provide them that opportunity to go, I never thought about it that
That's
way.
right.
I never thought about looking at it that way. Or like you shared earlier, is helping them identify their values, writing them down, so then they know how to align to
Yeah.
them. They kind of know what their values
Yeah.
are, but they've never really put them in concrete. So thank you for sharing that. And I want to be really respectful of your time because, like you said, we could go
Yeah.
hours on all this information. So,
Absolutely.
Duncan, what would you like to leave the audience with today?
So really, I just want to follow up on what you had said too about having the conversation and allowing students to having a culture of a psychologically safe environment for students to be able to ask the question of the coaches or even of their teammates. But it's know the why and don't assume. Right? Don't automatically think you know why a question's being asked, and because you're going to make an assumption, and I think we all know what happens when we make assumptions, right? So just know the why and don't assume. Like let them. There is a certain amount of let's meet them where they're at, and sometimes that'll work, but sometimes they also have to be led, and that's our job. If you're a coach or a mentor, you're like we have to lead, right? And sometimes people don't know any better. So that's, I mean, I don't want to say they don't know any better necessarily, but they've never had a good leader. And so sometimes they don't know what that looks like. So being a good leader can throw them, but I think that knowing the why and not assuming about what somebody's asking or why they're asking is an important thing to keep in mind. And as far as, I guess what thought to end with, so a couple of quick concepts, and I'm gonna two really, right? If you have you heard of Brian Johnson? He's got a book called Arete, and so
Yes.
right. So Arete is excellence, right? The pursuit of excellence, because I think that driving and chasing perfection is a race nobody's going to win. But if you're chasing perfection, hopefully you'll catch excellence on the way, right? So striving for that excellence, I think, is a good thing to do, because it can help temper that drive for perfection. A lot of student athletes and elite athletes have understanding that it's okay to not to be perfect. And then there's another concept, and I cannot for the life of me remember where I got it, but it's called mudita, M-U-D-I-T-A. And it says taking joy in others' success, right? Because it's not always going to be my day. I'm not always going to be that guy, right? And so if I'm not that guy or that girl, like, then you know what, that's okay. I'm going to support my team the way they need to be supported at that point in time. I'll get my chance. I'm putting in the work. I'm putting in the effort. But in the meantime, I'm going to celebrate my teammates' success, because they're putting in the work and the effort, and they deserve to be celebrated. So that concept of celebrating others' success, I think, is a pretty crucial thing to keep in mind.
And the world needs a lot of that right now.
Absolutely.
It's the stopping to tear down and all that good stuff. But I won't go down. That's a whole other episode.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't want to steal your thunder. We talked about that just a second ago. But Duncan, thank you. So how can people find and follow you and EADG?
So website is www.eadg.info. And email is info@eadg.info. We are on Instagram, Elite Athletic Development. It's not the full word of development because I limit the words. And I also have a speaking website, DuncanMacLeodSpeaks.com. But the www.eadg is a really good way to get a hold of us. It's got phone number, email, and all that sort of stuff.
Awesome. And I'll get everything from Duncan. I'll share it below. So if you're in the Virginia Beach area, or you've got an organization that needs a speaker or some workshops, Duncan would be the guy to reach out to. So Duncan, I really appreciate the time and all the wisdom that you shared with us today.
Jeff, I appreciate the time and the opportunity. I really do. It's been really cool. I appreciate it. And I will let you know, you're actually, this is my first full length podcast that I've been on, man. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
Nice.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
No, that's awesome.
And
good deal. Well, hang on for a quick second, and we'll catch up after.
Absolutely.
But everybody, Duncan MacLeod.
Take care, y'all. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Pathways to Greatness podcast. We hope that today's conversation inspired you to take steps towards your own greatness. Remember, every journey starts with a single step. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might benefit. Actually, share it with 3 people that you might think it might benefit. Until next time, keep pursuing your passions and carving your own path to greatness. Take care.